Hey folks, so I was thinking about the language around Jacobus, right? Yesterday I came across a pretty interesting video where this guy who's built a couple of products that have done millions of users, hundreds of millions of users, was talking about how his mental model when building a new product is not start with the technology behind the product, but start with the marketing, rather than the marketing, the language around the product, right? Like what is this product um, trying to like at the core of the product, you obviously got the core problem that's solving, right? And then the language is the scaffolding, which communicates the different ways that solves the problem for the customer, right? Now, his suggestion, which is counterintuitive, was to start from the second layer and then go inside the product and kind of because builders they've got this propensity of wanting to build stuff, right? Just start right into the building process without thinking about the scaffolding around that entire thing. And so I found that very interesting. And so and as such, I've been thinking about this theme for a while now. Right? How do I speak about Jacobus? So there's so many different angles. There's so many different words I could use, so many different phrases I could use, so many different analogies, so many different metaphors I could use. Right. So what exactly is the optimal set of words that I could use to communicate the core value proposition, um, the differentiators, right? I mean, nothing like this exists, but at the end of the day, like I've drunk the Kool-Aid, but I need to communicate that to the people that I'm selling this to, right? To the customers, be it the enterprise customers, be it the consumers. So how do I do that in the most optimal way, right? What are those words that really get the message across in the least amount of words possible, right? Because sure, there's always time where they can dive deeper into the product and understand that in more depth. When they go to the product, to the website, the hero section that should capture the core essence of that, right, and communicate that. And same with the marketing, right? Once we start doing marketing at scale, right? What's the best way to capture it? And then in terms of having conversations with people, right? I'm going to start selling this to people in real conversations, right? And so when I do that, what's my pitch? What are the words that I say which are the optimal? Because I could describe this in so many different ways. I could describe this as a dynamic art and storytelling platform, right, which does something, but does it do enough, right? And does it really capture it? And does it really is the optimal way of doing it, considering the person I'm speaking with, right? The persona I'm speaking with. I don't want to break it down person to person, but just there are these personas, right? Like restaurant personas and consumer personas and family people personas and couple personas, right? So like what are those set of words I can use to get my point across? So one of those things I've thought about is the cursor for personal art and dynamic storytelling, right? For home art and enterprise storytelling, which I think there are a few things I want to talk about when I talk about this, right? So what's the cursor? Like we are in a way building the cursor for personal art and storytelling. I have not come across a platform for personal art the way what Decovers does, right? Like there might be some niche platforms and they might be niche for a reason, when you add the hardware element and when you make it alive, when you make it life size, right? And then you may engage people's social uh, drives and you engage people's storytelling drives and you bring all of these things together, right? Then you build a platform, which is again the attempt that we've got over here. But the core question is why is so when I came across this phrasing, I'm really deployed this in any of my conversations, but I've got a pretty good intuition of how people might feel about this, right? Like building the cursor for art and storytelling, right? And there are a couple of things to talk about here. One is that there is a plethora of cursor for X, cursor for Y, cursor for Z on Y Combinator right now. And this reminds me of, 10 years back, 15 years back, there used to be Uber for X, Uber for Y, Uber for Z, right? And what this speaks to is this kind of a new platform being created, new way of doing something being created. In terms for Uber, it was this, creating a marketplace for something, right? And that Uber became the lexicon for creating a super accessible, super intuitive marketplace for something that was hitherto, not super accessible. So Uber did that. What Cursor does is it automates otherwise complex, otherwise time-consuming, not really complex, but otherwise time-consuming processes, which is exactly what Decovers does for you, right? It's Now, I'm not going to use this framing for conversations with enterprise customers. Like a restaurant person would have absolutely no clue about cursor for what does cursor mean, right? Cursor for my restaurant, from dynamic for my restaurant, what does it even mean, right? That would be the response I'd get. And nor would I be able to use this for the customers I'm speaking with, consumers I'm speaking with, because this is not really a product for developers, right? Like the persona, consumer persona that we are targeting, these are people who are more, less in those kinds of fields, more and more into, just have a taste, right? Like, let me just put it this way, right? Tech people don't have the best taste for art or nor an inclination for art and storytelling the way some other professions might, right? So tech people are obviously not the target audience for us. I mean, some of them might be, obviously, because people see this. Some tech people would see this as a natural evolution of dynamic space setting for their homes, right? So obviously it's going to appeal to those people, but that's going to be a narrow audience. I've got no idea, but I think I'm pretty strong in my intuitions around this. But anyways, I want to think about this other intuition that I have about why is the automation of art and storytelling seen differently than the automation of programming, right? Where people are just raving about it. People love Lovable and Cursor and Windsurf and all of that, right? If I were to kind of deploy this language onto Twitter, people would pan this, right? Not that I care about that, but I think I've got a pretty good intuition, a pretty good theory of mind around what people might think, right? And so I want to break that down. Where is that kind of that emotion coming from? And where is that psychological resistance coming from? And so we got a when people talk of when we think of cursor for XYZ cursor, right, literal cursor, cursor at the highest level, it automates logic, right? Programming, it's basically building, bringing, building blocks of logic together, solve a particular problem, right? There's elements of creativity involved, obviously, but it's more analytical than anything else. With creativity, with art and storytelling, it's all about creativity, and creativity is a realm of emotions. And creativity is seen as more human, right? That's a fundamental fact. Now, so why is creativity seen as more human when, a few centuries back, both logic and creativity were seen as the most defining trait, cognitive trait of the human creature, right? So what's changed? Not only creativity is kind of put on the pedestal. Logic has been, I wouldn't say, in a way, it's been commodified, it's been reduced, it's been the mystique around it, right? The entire scaffolding around it, which lent this ethereal air that's been stripped away. And so now we see logic like calculators, right? Like they're logic machines, and we don't really think of calculators as being anything glorious, right? They're just tools. Computers are a glorified calculator. And again, we think of them as tools. Now, AIs, our current LLMs, they are glorified X squared calculators. And some people have this feeling of that being magic, right? But some people are like, yeah, these are just sarcastic parrots. So logic, we, intuitively, we now kind of don't really see that as a core defining human thing, right? Like we've been able to create technologies that have been able to automate away logic the way we haven't been able to do with creativity, right? And so there's this God of the gaps argument, equivalent kind of an argument, which people also use for AI, right? Jagged frontier and all of that, which is that the things that we humans can't do, that's AI, right? And rather the things that computers can't do, that's AI. But what are the core differences between logic and creativity that are giving them these parts, right? With creativity, it's about taste, it's about judgment, it's about discernment, it's about empathy, it's about storytelling, it's about belonging, right? It's about these very core emotional things, right? With logic, there's a very clear path, and anyone who's going to arrive at that path, they're going to take the same path. Who's going to arrive at the answer, they're going to take the same path to the answer, right? Which is not the case with creativity, where you've got the subjective biases and you've got a very personal path to the answer, and the answer is going to look radically different, and it might not be for everyone, right? So there's a very personal element to creativity. You put yourself into your creative work the way you don't with something where it's all logic, right? And also, again, creativity is just so much closer to our emotions, and because it's so much closer to emotions, we are more emotional when it comes to creativity, which is not the case with logic, right? With logic, we can detach ourselves, and so even if you spent your entire last decade solving a really difficult mathematical theorem, sure, you might feel a sense of pride, um, but you can still detach from that particular result, and you'd be able to look at that objectively, and you'd have a different set of emotions compared to if you were to do that with a creative work, because you'd be able to see yourself in that creative work, while with the mathematical theorem, someone else could have arrived at that just the same, right? It didn't really need you the way that creative work did. So the creative work reflected something deep about you, and it was a unique contribution to this world that no one else could have created. The space of possibilities of creativity, it's I mean it's saying it's infinite, it's meaningless. It's quadrillion times greater than the space of logical permutations, right? And so people are not going to arrive, the odds of someone arriving at the same creative same creation as you are pretty minimal. Well, that's a pretty minimal, infinitesimally minimal, right? They're just non-existent. So creativity is something deep, it's something personal, because it's a reflection of something personal, and it's very unlikely that someone else would be able to come up with something of that sort. So why do we use the cursor for creativity, cursor for art and storytelling framing, right? At some point, if you project yourself 5 years, 10 years into the future, what's going to happen is we are going to, not 5, 10 years, I'm talking of 5 to 10 months actually. Actually, let me use the example of cursor, right? So back in the day, there was a pride that people had in the work that they produced, right? Programming was all about the toil of it, the actual hard work of, well, generating those words yourself by typing them out, right? And then Copilot came to the fore and people started using them. And there were some purists who were like, Copilot, if you're using Copilot, you're just not a pure coder, right? You're just not at that. You're not, I don't know what the critique would have been, like, precisely. I didn't have that critique ever, but I'm sure that some people had that critique. And then now some people would have that critique for people who are doing most of their code generation through cursor, where they're doing minimal typing, they're doing more orchestration and more architecture design, and less actual typing out functions and variable names and all of that. Right. So that is the exact thing that we predict will happen in the world of art, personal art, and storytelling, right? Which are the most fundamental parts of the human being. More important than anything else, right? More foundational to our being, right? We are all a product of our stories that our minds kind of hallucinate day in and day out, right? And these narratives that we've got in our minds, our identities, our sense of the meaning, the relationship we have with people and with the things that we love and the things that we hate for that matter, the things that we hope for and the things that we fear, the regrets that we carry and the hopes that we carry, right? All of these things, these are stories. Humans are fundamentally creatures of storytelling. And so one of our core beliefs at this company is that storytelling is the single most fundamental human thing, and that's going to stay the most important thing in the post-AGI world, right? Which is why we're kind of building this post-AGI company. And post-labor, post-AGI is, a very contentious term at this moment, so not sure how I feel about using it. For lack of a better word, I'll continue to use it, right? Post-AGI, post-labor, whatever you want to call it. We are kind of in that world. There are people who have got the blinders on, and I agree that the goalposts have been moving, right? If you ask most scientists in the year 1960, who are at the cutting edge of AI research, if our current state-of-the-art models are AGI, they would probably say yes. I've got that hunch. And now the goalposts have been moved to continuous learning, which I do believe should be a condition for AGI. At the same time, we got to set a definition, right? Like we can't jump around, like once we achieve the goal, milestone, we can't just say that, okay, arbitrarily move that goalpost forward, right? It just doesn't work because, like, sure, there's not, apart from OpenAI and Microsoft deal, which is very contingent upon the definition, sure, there's not a lot of economic value riding on the definition itself. But I think it would be useful to clarify. That's a separate thing. But anyways, so what we believe, one of our fundamental beliefs is that people will gravitate towards more self-expression and more creativity and more personal art and storytelling, right? Within creating their own worlds within themselves and sharing it with their friends and the families and with the social circle and with the broader world, right? And we want to build the ultimate platform for that. Now, the reason I like that phrasing of cursive, unlike that phrasing for a multitude of reasons, but also like that phrasing for multiple reasons. The reason I don't like it, I'll actually talk about the reasons okay, the reason I don't like it is, okay, forget about those reasons. The reason I do like it is that cursor, what's trying to say is that how you get to the end product doesn't matter. What matters when you build a product, right? That's the core insight that they have, is having the actual product in hand, right? Because you want to get to that. You want to automate away that process so you're able to build that thing that you want to build. Build it fast, build it easy. And you can empower millions more people, billions more people. If you automate away the technical grind of developing a product, developing an app by coding it manually, if you can automate that away, if you can abstract that away by having a prompt layer, right, which is the extreme, the lovable version of it, right, which is also what we're kind of trying to do, then if you can do that, you're going to get so many more people into art, into personal art, into creativity and storytelling. And there is so much inherent, latent value in people and getting people in touch with their inner lives, with the artists in them, right? Everyone, well, not everyone, but most people have the artists in them. They've got a storyteller in them. If you've got a tool, if you've got an AI that can help them do that, right? A platform that can help them do that, you bring so much more beauty to the world, you bring so much more meaning to the world, you bring so much more joy, so much more connection, so much more passion, so much more attunement to the world, which is, again, the fundamental goal that we have at TechOviz. And so I love that framing, right? I absolutely adore that framing for that reason. There are a couple of reasons I don't like it, but we don't need to go into those. I want to touch upon another aspect that I've already spoken about, so I'll keep this part brief. When people think of AI replacing humans, they tend to subscribe to a lot of the biases that have been prevalent in very common biases, right? Like, tend to subscribe to binary thinking that if AI comes to the fore, right, then because it's going to do job A, it's going to replace person A, person X who was doing job A, right? Don't realize that the markets can expand and they can expand considerably, and don't understand supply and demand, and they don't. So yeah, the Jevons paradox. So we talked about this. If you got more, like right now we got such a massive demand for more teachers, more doctors, more therapists, more coaches, more artists, more creators. Right, we've got a demand for so much more of these, right? I mean, Hollywood movies. I've written a piece about this and all of this, right? So I'm not going to repeat those points, but the points, I'll try to keep this short, is that the world is in need of so many more of these people, right? Now, we're just not going to be able to generate these people. Our fertility rates don't paint the greatest picture. So we just won't have enough people to satisfy these conditions, right? Nurses, for that matter. Like, wouldn't you rather have human nurses rather than like one human nurse for 2 people rather than one human nurse for 5 people, which is the case right now, right? So there are so many of these professions with human touch where with emotional engagement and involvement where we just need much more, right? And not just, even with technical stuff, there's a lot more that we need. So the point that I made in my piece is that AI is going to bring, there are so many areas where AI is going to bring so much more. It's going to bring abundance, right? It's going to make accessible to 99.9% of the population, and 99% of the population was only accessible to 1% of the population. The best teachers, the best therapists, the best artists, right? Which is again what we're trying to do over here. This is the great democratizing power of AI. And this is the exciting part about AI, right? The great democratizing, the great empowering. It's this is the reason why I'm not an AI apologist, I'm an AI evangelist, because it can make things accessible that was only accessible to 1% of the population, 0.1% of the population. Like the best teachers, again, go down the list. And the way you do that for art and storytelling is you remove the technical grind, right? Just as with Lovable, where people who don't have a clue about what's a WebSocket or how do you use this particular protocol or what's fast API, right? They have absolutely no clue about these basic things. But just by prompting and Replit, Agent 3, etc., and I'm sure what the labs are cooking, right? Like you literally would be able to prompt an app into existence. You are able to do that right now. Just imagine that for art and for storytelling. And we see the impact of that being so, so, so positive and so the second and third order effects of this would be something I can't even begin conceiving, right? Because again, art and storytelling, these are the mediums that we use to make sense of the world and to connect and to, just go about our lives. And if you can make that process accessible to people, and if you can make everyone into an, pardon the parlance, but if you can make everyone into an artist, right? If you can make everyone into a storyteller, you just don't know how much beauty and how much meaning and how much just the sheer amount of potential that has, right? That just that's what excites me so much about what we're doing over here, what we're building. The world needs a lot more Einsteins. There's no doubt about it, right? We should have solved fusion a long time back. We should have solved, we could have solved fusion a long time back had we had, 10 Einsteins. You could have solved grand unified theory. We could have solved, space-based solar power. We could have solved climate change, right? We could have solved weather control. There's so many problems that we're facing. Big problems. Flying from London to Tokyo in 10 minutes, right? That's something that is physically possible. You might be able to do this in the year 2100. We can't do it right now, right? So how do we solve that? There's so many of these problems that we want to solve as a society. And we just have enough brilliance, enough cognitive brilliance in the world, in our midst. We just don't have enough, right? Like for every 1 billion people, you only have one Einstein level genius in terms of IQ, right? And so it's not going to happen if you just rely on pure biology and pure biological replication of intelligence. It would take us a while to solve some of these problems that we don't even know how difficult they are, by the way, right? And they could be way more difficult than we anticipate. They could be way less difficult. But if we build a superior intelligence, this is one of the reasons why we are building AGI and ASI, right? We'd have a lot more, to borrow Dario's parlance, a country of geniuses in a data center, right? Now, if you got that, the potential of that is just immense, right? But I contend that we also need a lot more Da Vinci's and Picasso's and Dali's and Rembrandt's and Gaudi's in the world, right? And you could do that by making the AI could help us see a lot more of these brilliant minds, not just by AI being this, right? AI is not going to be a Rembrandt, it's not going to be a Van Gogh, it's not going to be a Picasso, right? But it could by automating away boring stuff, right? Especially with art, where we could have a lot more new creative movies and great ideas. With cognitive brilliance, I think there's a ceiling, right? But I think with art it's different because it's more about So let me put it this way, right? With IQ, there's a ceiling. You can only have above the IQ of 130, you only have 6% of the population, right? Above the IQ of 180, you only have 0.01% of the population, right? And you need those brilliant people to take on some of these harder challenges. With art, with storytelling, that is not quite true. Like we see people with no cognitive brilliance making brilliant movies and creating, coming with brilliant art styles and all of that, right? All that requires, I wouldn't say all that requires, that still is a huge thing, is novel ways of looking at the world, right? The synthesis of knowledge and world experience, life experience that comes up in a unique way and with this unique bent of expressing it that these people have, right? You had a handful of those in history that have made such a telling contribution to the arts that we talk of those, right? Just gave a few names, Michelangelo, etc. So my contention, like while AI is going to literally create Einsteins in a data center, it's going to free up human capital to become to for us to create humans to become these, you know, creme de la creme of artists, right? You're gonna have a lot more because AI is going to take on, right? Right now, for example, there could be a creative genius, a musical genius, who's having to do a boring job, and you might argue that if that person was serious enough, if they were brilliant enough, they would find a way to do it. But they might not have had the chance to do it, right? They might not have had the space to actually explore that particular thing. With the automation of the economy being completed, right? Where people will just be able to pursue their passions, pursue their hobbies and art and all of that. We literally will be able to, and the tools like the kinds that we're building with Zekowitz, right? We'll be seeing a lot more Gaudis and a lot more Rembrandts. And again, th- that's just so endlessly exciting. If you can make this happen, right? If you can create a tool that democratizes access to art and storytelling, you're going to see a proliferation of art, the kind we've never seen before, personal art and storytelling. And that's going to create a new renaissance, which is one of our meta goals of the company, right? How do we see that new renaissance in the world to increase the amount of beauty and meaning in the world? And so I'll end in a couple of minutes. The world needs a lot more art, it needs a lot more beauty, a lot more life, a lot more stories. Now, I'll use the example of doctors. Imagine a doctor, if they are 10x efficient, if they've got tools, if they've got an AI that can make them 10x more efficient, they're going to be able to take on 10x more patients, right? Yeah, to use a rough heuristic. Now, if art and storytelling become 10x easier and more accessible, 100x more people are going to engage with art and storytelling. And just as the world needs a lot more intelligence, it needs a lot more taste. And AI can provide the intelligence while humans provide the taste, right? So yeah, these are endlessly exciting times to be building what we are building. In this world, we'll see billions, hundreds of millions, potentially billions of people engage with personal art and storytelling, making the homes come alive, the homes and the lives, the inner lives and inner worlds and the outer worlds come alive with wonder and delight and attunement and beauty and meaning. And for brands, custom art and brand storytelling will become the core foundations for these enterprise spaces too, in the customer connections and customer journeys, and even for the employees for that matter. Deeper, more engaging, more fun, more interactive, more memorable experiences for the customers and guests, right? That's the world that we're building towards. A world richer with more art, more beauty, more emotion. And yeah, that's where I'll leave it at. Thanks for the time. I'll catch you later.